Chapter 1291, Chase. Cerberus couldn't believe it. Perhaps the two most powerful names when it came to the sword was now teaching Jakku, an extremely talented individual who was perhaps the most leading candidate when it came to the next generation Heavenly Swordmaster title. It was an absurd thought. No wonder he was so powerful. If those two masters were to teach Jakku, then there was no doubt in Cerberus' mind that the dark blue Dragonborn was going to be the single greatest swordsman that ever lived in the future. Now that alone would have been enough to elevate a name or a company to the highest level. But somehow, Jakku wasn't even the most talented individual among his siblings, let alone the whole reborn company. They were just that monstrously talented. Cerberus sighed. He joined Michael and the Rebornian army thinking that he was going to be protecting them, but it seemed that his actions were needless. They could already protect themselves. Michael and the Rebornian army moved forwards, intending to slowly explore the chasm in the hopes of running into the demi-human civilization hiding underground. In about an hour after they left, another group of people came and saw the aftermath of their fight. "The monkey ran this way," said a soldier as he ran towards the tunnel. Behind him were thousands of soldiers, probably numbering in the 5 digits close to 40,000. All of them were armored extremely well, but even then one could see that there were signs of wear and tear within their numbers. Many sported injuries, some were still bleeding, and all in all it looked like they had just gone through the ringer and barely survived. After all, they had just fought against an entire horde of magical monsters. They were ambushed. Those monkeys had almost torn their entire army apart. They were able to shred through their numbers, causing chaos and disarray that the monkey leader leveraged in order to cause even more problems. At the back of the army, the banner of the Vanderbilts proudly waved in the air. This was Levi's 2nd Division Army. They were in charge of scouting ahead, finding any signs of magical monsters. They were supposed to have imprisoned those monkeys and waited for their leader to capture their leader. However, they had underestimated their opponents, and they not only let the monkeys escape, but they had also endured a lot of injuries and even some casualties. But now, after running after the monkeys for what seemed like hours, they finally found them, just not in the way that they would have expected. The monkeys that they had so much trouble with were dead on the ground, their fur burned and singed. And their alpha, the giant magical monkey monster, suffered a more gruesome fate, lying in a pool of his own blood with his back filled with cuts. What's what happened here? A couple of minutes later, another army arrived behind them. Leading them was Levi Vanderbilt, sitting on his palanquin, being advised by his closest people. "What happened with our prey? Did you catch them?" The soldier kneeled, sweating. "No, sir, we found them, but it seems that someone got to them first." Frowning, Levi got off his palanquin and went to the scene of the crime. He saw obvious evidence of a fight, an organized one. "Have the Goldstones finally joined our pursuit?" asked one of Levi's advisors. "They're the only ones who could have defeated a horde of monsters like this." But Levi shook his head. He knew Teresa's army. They were a lot more rowdy, more uncontrolled, especially with the motley of allies she had. There would have been more evidence of their fight, more footsteps, more bloodshed. They could not have done this, it was by someone else. "Whoever fought them, they're good," Levi said. "They didn't suffer any casualty or even any injury." "That can't be possible," said one of his advisors. "Even if these magical monsters were mere juveniles, the kind of power they have can be equivalent to a 9th stage body formation cultivator. There's no adventuring party that could have achieved that." Levi agreed. Soon his expressions turned serious. All kinds of thoughts entered into his mind. Perhaps there was an unknown army that had ventured into the chasm. Perhaps it came from another conglomerate wishing to get ahead of the curve. It could even have been one of his siblings. Perhaps he wasn't the only Vanderbilt here, or perhaps Teresa was hiding a different ally. There were too many unknowns. "Let us take these corpses with us, then we move on." "We aren't going to be pursuing them?" asked one of his soldiers. "No, the fact that they didn't bother to get these corpses means that they want to get ahead. We can't let them. We'll go ahead and follow our route. Our scouts have assured us that it will have the fastest course to the center of the chasm." Levi didn't even have Michael or the Reborn Company in his mind. He never would have thought that they could have done this, especially not with only 15,000 men. They, they, they. Michael and the Rebornian army made camp after a day's worth of journey. The chasm was so huge and expansive that it would probably take a month or so before they reached the ends of the current explored tunnels. So they weren't in a hurry. And since they were in here for the long haul, Michael made sure that there was a proper supply line that sustained their journey. The Rebornians brought out their tents and began setting them up. They created their campfires and began cooking some meat and vegetable soup to distribute to the rest of the army. Michael watched this with a dissatisfied look on his face. This wouldn't do. As a Rebornian, he promised everyone that they would experience comfort for as long as they stuck with him. And he was going to keep true to his word. Perhaps it was time to brush up on his magic, just like Cerberus said. Chapter 1292, Brushing Up on Magic. Right now he was a fifth circle wizard. The magical cores in his body had been stuck like this for years. But that didn't mean that his magic theory had been lacking. Chat JK6 had been continuing her hoarding of magical theories even when he hadn't been focusing on magic. She had magic spells that were way above the 5th stage. There were even a few 9th level spells that she was able to snag. The reason why we can't build too big of a camp was because of the obvious dangers. Now, with their capabilities, they could have easily built their own camps underground. He could easily instruct the Rebornian carpenters and construction workers to build a utopia here. However, that would attract the unwanted attention of the monsters that laid in wait. Just like they'd been proven earlier this day, a magical monster could spontaneously appear out of nowhere without any warning. They were lucky it had just been juveniles that attacked them. If each of those 100 monkeys had the strength of nascent spirit cultivators, Michael would have been forced to mass teleport his army out of this place and abandon their mission of talking with the demi-humans. So no construction, nothing that would create tremors on the ground, that would only act as a signal. But thankfully, there was an aspect of reality that was basically reserved only for Michael. And that was magic. Everyone was blind to the mana in the air except for Michael. So any spell that he created underground would be undetectable to normal people. He could basically use magic to create his own pocket dimension here. Usually this wouldn't have been feasible. Even a 4th circle wizard would have known what he was doing. But right now, magic was gone. Nobody would be able to sense the disturbance in mana that he was going to create. Not the magical monsters, not the human armies here, not even the demi-humans. The only ones who could possibly find out what he was doing were the mystic masters. However, one of the two that was present here in the chasm was a friend of his, and the other was stuck overground in another pocket dimension studying a corpse of a magical monster. No one would know. Michael closed his eyes, reaching into the deep base of knowledge in Chat JK6's database. What do you require? I want the magical spells that would allow me to create something like a pocket dimension, but not exactly like it. A pocket dimension would be nice, they'd have all the privacy they needed, but it would be very inconvenient having everyone go in and out of it every day. Basically, Michael wanted to create a space that can be packed up and be moved at a moment's notice. For example, they would build an entire fort in this camp. It would have all the necessities their army required, a place for sleeping, for eating, and even for entertainment. But once the night had passed, they would be able to pack up everything and move it to another location. It was a pocket dimension that would be open to anybody and everybody. Why? Why would he want to go through all of this trouble? Why would he risk getting caught by the magical monsters? It was simply because he wanted to eventually share this safe haven to any that wanted it. He knew that they weren't the only people here in the chasm. Aside from the armies of Levi and Teresa, there were countless more adventurers and private parties that had come to this chasm in the hopes of striking it rich. They thought that they would be fighting against demi-humans. Risky, but it was well within the bounds of what they were capable of. At least that's what they expected, but they didn't know that magical monsters existed. They didn't know that there were creatures here that prowled the darkness, each one as strong as a nascent spirit cultivator. And by the time they find out the truth, it would be too late. They would either have been killed or be lost within the endless maze of the underground chasm. Michael hoped it was the latter, and he was hoping that they would run into them before they lose all hope. It was his way of spreading kindness. Would you like me to synthesize your custom magic spell?
Yes.
Creating spell completed.
Oasis.
Seventh circle spell. Able to imbue entire space to become packed away. Michael was satisfied with ChatJK6's new spell. It was exactly what he wanted. Now, the only problem would be that he didn't have the proper power to execute such a spell. So now he had to actually start practicing his magic. He closed his eyes, he reached down deep into the magic circles deep into his core. Hidden underneath the depths of his nascent core, there were small halo-like circles that had been in there this entire time. Then he opened up his senses. He used his supreme talent to make himself aware of every single mana around him. All the light mana coming from his rebornian army, the earth mana from the ground, everything. And he breathed it in, he commanded them all to come to him. His pores seemed to open up. Little globules of mana began pouring into him as if he was some kind of black hole. They weren't just falling, they were actively shooting towards him at a commensurate rate. Michael smiled. You've been lonely too, huh? The absence of magic hadn't just affected the wizards and humans in the world. The mana in the air had also felt the loneliness of not being able to communicate with the world. But then here came Michael, giving them the opportunity to once again contact the world. They immediately came towards him, and when he asked them to lend them his powers, they immediately accepted. Slowly, the halo of circles around his nascent core began to glow, and an entirely new halo began to manifest above it. Chapter 1293, Advancing Circles. In a mere instant, Michael was able to progress straight to the sixth circle of his magic. This had been a long time coming. His magnetic powers had far surpassed that of his magic, creating a sort of imbalance that had always made Michael feel a little bit off. But now, magic was starting to level with his ability powers. Soon enough, more magic came to him. They were hungry for his touch, with some of the magical globules actively trying to fight each other so that they could be the one to integrate with his body instead. It wasn't long before the seventh halo began to appear around his nascent core. He was trying to break through to the seventh circle in one go. And somehow he was succeeding. Cerberus got out of his tent and looked at Michael with wide eyes. The hairs on top of his arm stood up as he felt the disturbance in his own body. The magic stored in his mana cores were actually getting pulled towards Michael. It was as if they wanted to go to him. This was absolutely unbelievable. The mana in his cores should have been completely locked into his body. This was the case for normal wizards and even more so for a peak wizard like that of a mystic master. He should have full control over his own magic, and yet he was feeling the exact opposite. Michael! And somehow, Cerberus wasn't that angry at all, because he knew what Michael was trying to do. He could feel Michael's magical prowess increasing by the second. He could tell that Michael was progressing through his magic circles in quick succession. That crazy, talented bastard. Cerberus didn't know if he should be angry or not. Recklessly trying to advance through the stages of magic should be impossible. More than that, it was reckless. If something went wrong, Michael could easily lose all of his progress with his magic and he could be brought down back to the first circle. And yet, as the seconds passed, Cerberus was starting to see Michael's body settle into a steady rhythm. Somehow, Michael was able to advance 2 stages without a single backlash. The boy was talented, but even this should be too much. And as if Michael could hear Cerberus' thoughts, the power spike in Michael's body continued to rise up and up without seemingly any intention of stopping. The seventh halo in Michael's body finally turned corporeal. He had officially become a seventh circle magician. But it wasn't enough for him. He continued to absorb the mana in the air, knowing that they would lend him his powers. Mana was like a wild animal. Forming a magic circle was like taming that wild animal in order for it to work for his own goals. And the reason why no one should advance 2 stages in quick succession was because at this point, Michael shouldn't have been able to tame the magic yet. He was able to put a leash on the mana and put it on his own farm, but that didn't mean he had tamed it yet. This would take time to do so. And if an ordinary person tried to advance 2 stages in quick succession like he did, then he would basically be trying to tame 2 wild animals at the same time. They'd easily lose control of their captured animal. In the best case, they would escape, and in the worst case, they would prey on the domesticated animals in the farm. But Mitchell still went ahead with this because he knew that he had absolute control over mana. Not only that, but the absence of magic had caused even these wild animals to voluntarily tame themselves to him. So in a matter of a few minutes, Michael turned from a 5th-circle magician to an 8th-circle wizard. Just like that, huh? Cerberus said, holding his hands to his waist with a sigh. Only Michael could make their hard work seem so easy and effortless. Of course, Michael tried to advance to the 9th circle immediately after that. It would not be that easy, Cerberus said. You'll need something different. You'll need your own realm of magic. Realm of magic. The mystic master nodded. You'll need an aspect of reality that is yours and yours only. Your mastery over this kind of magic must be unparalleled. Then and only then will the universe allow you to advance to become a 9th circle wizard. Michael had no answer for that kind of question. He hadn't even used magic much, so he had no idea what kind of magic he was good with. As far as he knew, he was good with everything, but this also meant that he was good with nothing. A jack of all trades but a master of none. This process didn't look like it could happen quickly, so he put these thoughts aside for now. Since he was an 8th circle wizard now, he could easily execute the idea he had from before. He closed his eyes, and then suddenly golden magic circles appeared all around him, illuminating the dark interior of the chasm caverns. He scooped up all the magic in his surroundings and transformed them into building materials. Logs, metals, everything. And then more magic circles appeared, hundreds of them. Golden hands emerged out of these magic runes and they began to hold the wooden logs and metal plates with them. With absolute precision, these magical hands began to create small lodgings and housings that would make up the eventual camp for the Rebornian army. Everyone was mesmerized with this sight. It was as if the hands of the gods themselves had come down and began to create their houses for them. Lodgings, a cafeteria, a water well, a town square, a tavern, a training area, everything was created within the matter of a few minutes. Michael was able to create an entire city, one fit for 15,000 men and more. Chapter 1294, Oasis in the Chasm. I'll admit, even I couldn't have done this, said Cerberus. The amount of complexity and cooperation one would need to simultaneously control hundreds upon hundreds of magic circles, each one with its own specific roles and jobs, was impossible to juggle even for a mystic master like Cerberus. But for Michael, it was extremely easy. He didn't divide his mind into thousands of parts for nothing. And ChatJK6 basically handled everything for him, so his workload has lessened tremendously. It was only through his unique circumstances that he was able to do this. All hail the Supreme Leader. All hail. The Rebornian soldiers began chanting their praise for Michael. They thought they'd have to spend a month sleeping on the cold, hard ground. Who would have thought they'd experience the warmth of a bed? And so, on that night, the Rebornian camp basically had a small celebration amongst themselves. It was to commemorate their first successful fight as well as their relief at being able to do so. Then, the next morning came. Despite drinking with merriment last night, the soldiers woke up very early in their schedule to clean up and do some exercises before the day started. Once that was done, their camp was ready to leave. Michael raised both of his hands, and then suddenly a giant golden magic circle appeared underneath their entire camp. A mystical barrier enclosed the entire space, and a few seconds later their camp disappeared into nothingness. Where there used to be hundreds upon hundreds of small rooms and lodgings, now there was nothing but stalactites and stalagmites. Even the evidence of their campfire was gone. It was as if their camp never even went here in the first place. But in truth, it didn't disappear. It was simply stored in Michael's own body until they needed it again. Once the day passed, he could easily summon their camp onto an empty space underground, and everything would be the same as they left it. This was the power of magic.
Eh, eh, eh.
We have to leave now, we don't know when those monkeys will come back. A small group of adventurers, 6 of them in total, were in complete disarray as they hid in a small alcove against a wall. Their armors and clothes were tattered and almost destroyed. Their faces were filled with anxiety and grime. Injuries covered their entire bodies, but blood no longer pulsed out of their cuts, with most of their injuries already having scabs on them. After all, they'd been trapped here in the chasm for what seemed like weeks. They were lucky they had a pocket dimension that stored a lot of rations, or else they would have died from starvation already. In fact, they would be lucky if that's their only problem. They almost lost their lives after encountering some kind of monkey monster in the chasm. They thought they could defeat these monsters. They were wrong. Their 6th stage body formation cultivation was nowhere near enough to kill these monkeys. They seemed far stronger than them and had more numbers too. So they ran. They were forced to go away from their known path back to the surface, trying to escape the monkeys' clutches. And they did, but now they couldn't find their way back to the surface. It seemed they'd be buried here in the end. "Come on, we have to move," said their leader. They trudged through the maze, their moves slow and haggard. And then, they heard something. Immediately their instincts took over and they went on full alert. They raised their swords and stared at the direction of the noise. A few seconds later they realized the sound wasn't coming for them. It wasn't even a monster, it was a human, a group of them, laughing. They were laughing in a hellscape such as this. Were they dreaming? "What do we do?" Their leader looked sleep-deprived, but he still had the cognitive reasoning to say, "We have to go investigate." They walked through a tunnel before finding themselves in a completely foreign world. Bright lights assaulted their vision. After a few blinks they adjusted to their surroundings. And immediately they saw an entire civilization, one that was as expansive as the cities back overground. Human soldiers lounged on their patios, some stayed outside with a campfire. There were even some who were hanging some laundered clothes onto a string. This must be a mistake, we must be dreaming. In their desperation to return to the surface, their minds must have hallucinated an entire city. However, the soldiers' words broke them out of their stupor. "Are you guys adventurers?" asked the soldier.
Yes.
The Rebornian soldier nodded. "You guys look worse for wear. Follow that road over there, just 2 blocks over, and you'll see an inn where you can take a bath and eat." The adventurers were dumbfounded. An inn, right in the middle of the maze, that wasn't possible. "What are you guys waiting for? Go." With the soldiers prodding, the adventurers followed the road and eventually found themselves onto the inn. Underground home. They could smell alcohol coming from the establishment, and meat, freshly cooked meat, and warm sheets and merriment and water and everything else. Even if this was a hallucination, as long as they could feel the warmth of a bed one last time, they were willing to do so. They entered the inn and were greeted by the receptionist. They asked for a room and they were given a key without any problems. They weren't even asked for money. "I'll heat up the bath for you guys," said the receptionist. "Just follow me." They were led to a man-made hot spring outside. Natural rock formations created a perfect basin for the pool with perfect aesthetics. It looked and felt very relaxing. "Is this heaven?" "I guess so. I want to see if heaven is refreshing." And with those words, they plunged into the hot springs and finally found themselves able to relax after 2 weeks wandering the chasm maze. Chapter 1295, Adventurers. For these weary adventurers, it was hard to think that just a few hours ago they were mired with dirt and blood, thinking that they weren't going to last another day. But now they were enjoying their time, having fun and eating delicious food. It was a literal oasis in a hellfield. Once they had relaxed in the hot springs, they were quickly introduced to the rest of the Rebornian army, finding out who they were and what they were here for. "You're here to talk with the demi-humans, we've seen them." Michael perked up. Perhaps they had the clue as to how they were going to communicate with the civilization hiding in the depths. "To be honest, we were here to hunt those demi-humans. We thought that they were an easy way to get rich. but we almost died. We followed the clues spread around the adventuring circles. Rumor had it that the demi-humans were located near a volcanic fissure, and so we followed any magma veins that we could find. Unfortunately, this only led us closer to those monsters, those monkeys. This was a very good clue. Michael could easily use his supreme talent to search for a large concentration of magma around him. "I know that you're our saviors and that we owe you our lives," said the adventurer. "But, can we ask for a favor? Can you help escort us out of this place?" Michael didn't even hesitate. "Sure." He raised his hand and created a portal right in front of the adventurers. "Hop in." The adventurers all looked at each other before peeking into the green portal right in front of them. Their eyes widened once they felt the cool breeze of a jungle welcoming them on the other side. Freedom. "Thank you, we will never forget this kindness." And with that, the adventurers were saved from a fate of being trapped under the chasm for the entirety of their lives. They wouldn't have found a way out of this place by themselves, especially with how injured and exhausted they were. The Rebornians were literally their saviors. And so, once they exited out of the portal, they immediately decided to go to the nation of Reborn to live there for the foreseeable future.
They, they, they.
Those weren't the only adventurers they eventually came across as they walked through the underground chasm. Some they encountered while they were marching through the dark tunnels. Once they saw their numbers, they either left them alone or they approached with the thoughts of becoming allies with the army. Of course, once they said that they were here to hunt the demi-humans, Michael immediately rejected their proposals. Anyway, it seemed that there weren't as many adventuring parties who were as desperate as the ones they met earlier. Some looked worse for wear, but they still had the intentions of adventuring deeper into the chasm. When Michael warned them of danger, they either treated it as something natural or they treated it as a hoax. Opportunities always blinded the ignorant. And about a few days later, some adventuring party finally came across the Rebornian army during the nighttime. Michael had just placed down their oasis camp, creating a civilization in an open space within an instant. "What the hell?" said an adventurer as he looked down a cliff and saw the Rebornian camp in the distance. The bright lights drew them to it quite easily. Who would be so stupid as to use so many campfires underground? And why would they set up a camp here? Don't they know the dangers of this place?
Yeah.
The new group of adventurers, one who looked like they were veterans of their craft, ventured down the cliff and approached the Rebornian camp. They were here simply to give some advice to their leader. "Who goes there?" asked a Rebornian soldier guarding the walls. "Excuse me, we mean no hostility," said the adventurers. They all had their hands raised up to show their innocence. "Are you here to visit our oasis?" asked the soldier. "Very well, though I advise you to please keep your weapons to yourself." The adventurers were surprised. They were let in just like that. No inspection, no intense interrogation, nothing. It seemed that the defenses here were lacking as well. How have they defended a camp so audacious as this and not have gotten attacked by the monsters that prowled in the darkness? "We're here just to warn you," said the leader of the adventurers. "This place is not as simple as first advertised. The demi-humans aren't the only dangers that are hiding in the depths." But instead of apprehension or ridicule, the Rebornian soldier simply nodded his head. "I see. Our supreme leader will pay you handsomely if you are able to provide some clues as to the location of the demi-humans and the magical monsters here." The adventurers were at a loss for words. They knew about those creatures, and they still created this camp. Even the conglomerates wouldn't be this bold, and they had superior numbers and quality of soldiers. Curious, the adventurers took the chance that was presented to them, and they entered into the camp. They immediately felt the difference. This place didn't feel like a camp per se, it felt like a civilization. They weren't using this place to just sleep and get some brief reprieve from the dangers of the chasm. This place went above and beyond that. It offered comfort, joy, and entertainment. There was a tavern here of all places. Didn't they know that most adventuring parties would kill to get fresh water? "Who are these people, Reborn?" "I think I've heard of them. They're the company who creates those automobiles." "Ah, no wonder they have the money to do something like this. They must spend so much in order to resupply everything here." Speaking of which, the adventuring party noticed that there was a certain blacksmith shop in the middle of the camp. And it just so happened that their weapons and armors were in need of a replacement. Chapter 1296, Dwarf Scowl.
Well,
Those were the only words they could muster once they saw the assortment of armors and weapons on display in this blacksmith shop. When they entered here, they weren't expecting much. Probably something that was only made in a hurry, something that was light and easy to carry as well. After all, why would they want to bring that much armor down here? But as it turned out, they were wrong. Upon a single glance, they could immediately tell that these armors were even better than the armors they were already proud of wearing. Do you see the metalwork on this? Did this come from the Hephaestus workshop? No, I think it's even better. Look at this weapon. I feel like it's going to cut me even before I touch it. I didn't think the Reborn company would specialize in armor and weapons too. I thought they just produced those automobiles. After picking out what they were interested in, they immediately went to the counter in order to ask for the price. Excuse me, we would like to purchase some items. After a few seconds of silence, the adventurers thought that there was no one here, but then someone said, "What do you want?" They all looked around, wondering where that voice came from. "I'm over here, you dimwits." It took them a good while to realize that the one talking to them was under the counter itself. They had to go on their tiptoes just to see the white hair coming off of the blacksmith. "Oh, we would like to purchase." The adventurer's words were caught in his throat as he realized who he was looking at. Slightly pointed ears, extremely short stature, long beard. No way, it was an actual real-life dwarf. They'd only seen them in textbooks. A dwarf. The blacksmith looked at them with a scowl. "A human," he spat on the ground. "Tell me what you want." The adventurers couldn't come up with an answer immediately. They were still trying to digest the fact that they were staring at a dwarf right now. Weren't they supposed to be closed off from the world? If this dwarf was the one who created these armors and weapons, then there was no wonder its quality was so high. "Come on, out with it," said the dwarf. "Will you want to buy something or not? I don't have all day." Finally, the adventurers were spurred on. "Oh, yeah, I'll want a new armor set for myself. A spear for me. Do you have some boots?" The dwarf simply glared at the adventurers for a good minute before he exited out of the counter and began walking through his own blacksmith shop. Wordlessly, he took out an armor set, a spear, a pair of boots, and more weapons and paraphernalia. "Here," the dwarf said. The adventurers didn't know what to say. This wasn't what they wanted. The dwarf just chose it for them. But not wanting to offend a dwarf, they eventually chose to test out the armors and weapons he chose for them. And they were pleasantly surprised that it fit them perfectly. Not only that, but it seemed as if they had finally found their partner. It was as if their vision had been blurry this entire time, but now they had been given glasses and now had perfect vision. These equipments were exactly what they needed, even if they didn't know what it was they needed in the first place. And even the items that the dwarf gave them that they didn't need, they eventually realized that they, in fact, needed it. Once they wore it, they didn't want to let it go again. Amazing, so this is what quality work is supposed to be. I've never felt so free with such heavy equipment. Thank you, wise dwarf. I'll never want to wield anything ever again. This spear will be with me forever. Seeing their responses, the dwarf's scowl turned a little bit better. HMPH, of course I made them. It seems that being stationed here is that bad at all. I'll get to meet more people like you, people who can finally learn the difference between something good and something perfect. Whatever, I wanted to build automobiles, but this is good too. The adventurers turned to the dwarf. How much does it cost? We only have a few million gold coins on us, but we can get more once we get out of here. The dwarf waved his hand. If you are able to provide our supreme leader some important information about the demi-humans and the magical monsters, then you can have those for free. The adventurers looked at each other. Of course, their answer was easy.
They, they.
Is that true? Michael asked the adventurers. Yes, we've seen it ourselves. We were lucky that we were able to get out. If it weren't for the Vanderbilt army being there, we would have been toast. Michael was just told that there had been sightings of demi-humans in some obscure part of the chasm. And these demi-humans were standing atop those magical monster monkeys, seemingly controlling them like they were horses. Unlike most of the demi-humans who used guerrilla tactics by hiding in the shadows before attacking and retreating into a tunnel, these demi-humans instead had their own territory and was out there prowling with the magic monsters under their hands. And it seemed that the Vanderbilt army had just made contact with them. Michael immediately wanted to get over there. Can you tell me where they are? The adventurers gave Michael the map they made for themselves, detailing a good amount of the explored tunnels in the chasm, including the place where the demi-humans were spotted. Michael thanked them for their help, but they thanked him instead. They said that the armors and weapons were well worth it for something as mundane as that. Sorry, but I don't think we'll be able to escort you there. We don't have the strength to fight in that kind of battle, said the adventurer. Michael nodded and let them go. They decided to wander the tunnels by themselves and defeat some stray magical monsters to earn their money. Chapter 1297, Lava Lake. The adventurers parted ways with Michael and the Rebornian, choosing to wander through the chasm and earn their living that way. And on the way, they inevitably found themselves face to face with more adventurers. Is it true that there are monsters here that are at the same level as a nascent spirit cultivator? Asked one of the foreigners. Yes, it's true. Why, are you going to be hunting them down? The foreigners nodded. We have no choice. It's the only way we're going to succeed in a cutthroat place like this, now that magic is gone. We don't have a reliable way to make money anymore. I just hope that we don't get lost in this maze. I've heard that getting lost is the leading cause of death here, much more than the creatures that prowl these depths. We guess that you guys don't have that much of a problem with those creatures. You have really good armor and weapons. The adventurers all looked at each other. If you're lucky, you may run into an oasis. This caused the foreigners to become confused, so the adventurers began spilling all the details about their brief visit to the Rebornian camp. Of course, those details were very hard to believe. A hot spring, a tavern, warm beds, it sounded like it was nothing more than a hallucination that their minds concocted in order to cope with the horrors of the depths. However, the proof came with the fact that their weapons and armors were truly unique. They were unlike anything that had been produced in the world. It was made by a dwarf, after all. The foreigners were still a little doubtful of the adventurers' words, but they kept their eyes on such a location. And so, this was the place where the rumors of an oasis in the depths of the chasm began to flourish. Michael and the Rebornian army continued forwards now with a lot more direction than before. He knew where to go. The map that the adventurers gave him was quite detailed, showing a good layout of the tunnels in the chasm. And on the way, they were ambushed with more magical monsters coming from out of nowhere. Lizards, bears, cockroaches, all manners of mutated creatures, each one having the strength of a high-leveled magnetic cultivator, had attacked them at random. Thankfully, Jakku and the Rebornian army were well equipped to deal with those magical monsters. Their command over the Lionheart Flame only grew more powerful as they got more hands-on experience on the field. Strangely enough, they weren't being targeted by the demi-humans. From all the accounts he'd heard, most adventuring parties became subject to the guerrilla tactics of the demi-humans. They would appear in the shadows in a blitz, dealing significant damage to them before retreating into the tunnels and disappearing. This kind of pattern of attack would persist for days on end, making the adventurers paranoid and injured, leading to them straying off the explored path of the maze, making them lost. Michael hoped that they were targeted at least once. That way, he'd have a chance to communicate with the demi-humans. Unfortunately, not a single one came their way. Perhaps it was because of their massive numbers, or perhaps because they had rightfully estimated their strengths. Anyway, it seemed as if the demi-humans wouldn't be coming to him anytime soon. He'd have to come to them. Thankfully, by the end of the 5th day of travel, they reached the supposed location. The entire cavern was lit with an orange hue, brought about by the large magma lake in the middle of the open space. On the walls, glowing igneous rocks provided more lambent light that allowed for great visibility even underground. It looked like they weren't the only ones here. He could already tell that there were thousands of life forms gathered in this large open cavern. On one side, there were humans, numbering about 50,000 men or more. They seemed to be in a stalemate with the other side of the cavern, which consisted of giant, lizard-like magical monsters being ridden by red, manky demi-humans. Michael gestured for his army to stop. He didn't want to break their stealth for now, he wanted to observe everything first. He sent out his mini drones down before he eventually saw the leader of the human army, Levi Vanderbilt. He rode on a palanquin as he addressed the demi-humans opposite him. "We are not here for hostilities," said Levi. "As long as you surrender your control over the chasm, then we will leave you alone." A red, manky demi-human stepped forward. He wore glowing, igneous rock as his armor, signifying his leadership within his group. "Leave now, human, or else we will not hesitate to unleash hell upon your army." Levi shook his head. "Look, I am willing to negotiate with your civilization. As long as you allow us to build a bridge in the chasm, I am willing to share the profits with you." "No," said the red manky, "no one shall build a bridge where we reside." This seemed to frustrate Levi very much, and Michael had a feeling that this wasn't the first time he'd tried to negotiate with the demi-human. "Let me talk with your monarch, I know you have one, maybe she'll have more of a mind to talk about business." The demi-humans snarled once Levi said that. "No one is permitted to enter our kingdom, no one is worthy to meet our monarch." A lot of the human soldiers amongst Levi's army wanted to scoff at the demi-humans' words. After all, these people were living in a backwards world under the continent. They could barely be considered as a civilization. However, the growl coming from the lizards they tamed made them reconsider those thoughts. After all, these giant lizards were magical monsters that were each a nascent spirit cultivator. There must have been 20 of them in total. Even if Levi fought against them, the result would be extremely bloody. Their win would be Pyrrhic, as he would have had to sacrifice more than half of his army. Chapter 1298, Convergence. Michael watched everything from afar with an analytical view. How did these magical monsters get so powerful underground, and how were the demi-humans able to tame them? From what he knew and from the reports given, the demi-humans were also having trouble dealing with the magical monsters just a few days ago. But now, they were suddenly taming them, and not just the juvenile ones who only had the strength of a body formation cultivator, but they had fully captured an entire horde of adult monsters that had the power of nascent spirit cultivators. Of course, when comparing them to nascent spirit cultivators, Michael was only comparing their brute strength and defense. True nascent spirit cultivators still had the upper hand. They had the nascent armor and the nascent influence. Meanwhile, these creatures only had brute strength to help them fight, so in a fight, a cultivator should always win against a magical monster. However, what made them truly dangerous was their sheer numbers. There were 20 of them here, and this was already enough to deal with Levi's entire army composed of more than 50,000 well-trained soldiers. Naruto Sasuke. Michael summoned both of his chief shadows orcs. Bu-22. Ra-ta-ta. They kneeled in front of him. "Do you guys think you can infiltrate those demi-humans?" The two shadow orcs turned to look at the giant lizards, their eyes narrowing once they realized the kind of power that these creatures held. "These magical monsters are powerful, but they are not smart," said Naruto. "If we are sneaky about it, we can easily send our shadows to infiltrate their kingdom." The demi-humans purely rely on those magical monsters. They won't expect a shadow to be implemented in their tamed monsters. Michael nodded. "We'll have to do it ourselves," said Sasuke. "Our elite penumbras will not be enough for this caliber of mission." In order to minimize risks and dangers, the two orc chieftains decided to fulfill the mission themselves, if Michael chose to deploy them. "Stand by for now," he said. "I'll first see if I can use my mini drones to infiltrate their kingdom." He didn't want to risk his orc chieftains for this. So he looked back towards the confrontation between the demi-humans and Levi's army. It was a stalemate until the red mankeys began to retreat back into the lava lake in the middle of the open cavern. The lizards slowly slithered backwards but kept their eyes on the human soldiers in front of them. They descended into the lava as if it was mere water. The monster's skin didn't burn as they were engulfed in lava. Even the red mankeys riding on their backs were kept safe from the broiling heat of the molten magma. Eventually, they disappeared into the depths of the lava, with only a few bubbles showing on the surface. Don't pursue them. The tunnels underneath this lava lake are still unexplored. They could easily lead us to ruin. Michael was of the same opinion. Plunging into the lava was easy, especially for a nascent spirit cultivator such as him, but it was navigating through the tunnels underneath the lava bed that was hard. No doubt the demi-humans had traps set in place. Levi would have to find a way to get into the demi-human kingdom some other way. Michael was going to send his own mini-drone to follow after them, but it seemed that the shadow orcs had gotten ahead of him with that. "Bu-22, we have deployed ourselves," said Naruto in his head. "Ra-ta-ta. We have attached ourselves into the shadows of these creatures. They have no clue about our existence. It won't be long before we find a way into their kingdom." The two shadow orc chieftains had gone ahead and deployed themselves even when he said not to. He had completely underestimated Naruto and Sasuke's desire for a mission. The two had been stuck in an office for months now, after all. They must have been itching to find a mission that would get them active and moving, and now they had found the perfect opportunity. Perhaps this mission would be the one that they'd been waiting for that would allow them to advance. Anyway, Michael didn't worry about them. Those two were trained by Fudge himself. He'd be more worried about the demi-humans rather than them. He put his attention back onto the cavern. Levi had ordered his men to retreat. They seemed to have found a place for them to settle down and make camp for the next few days at the very least. Michael could tell that Levi was still planning on going through the lava lake. He had sent some scouts to start exploring it after all. Perhaps after a few days, he'd be venturing to the depths to search the demi-human kingdom. Michael also ordered his men to find a place to settle down. They chose an open space a few kilometers away from everyone else to make sure that they still had privacy. And a few hours later, newcomers began to appear one by one. First, it was just a group of adventurers. They seemed to be attracted to the opportunity. If Levi Vanderbilt was interested in this, then there was definitely a treasure here to be found. Then, soon after that, the Goldstones appeared. Teresa was nowhere to be found, but her army was here, all 30,000 of them. They set up camp near the Vanderbilts. It didn't take long before hostilities between the two to start. Skirmishes once again erupted between the Goldstones and the Vanderbilts. The chasm had a few places where vegetation grew, which was important for resources and supplies, so it was important for the armies to take control of them. And the two armies made sure to either steal or keep these vegetation places to themselves. Inevitably, this led to some adventurer parties getting tired. "Those conglomerates, they aren't leaving anything for us." "You're right, but what can we do? We're just shrimps out here hoping that the sharks give us the scraps." "Hey, did you guys hear about a rumor about an oasis?" Chapter 1299, Pel. Rumors about a supposed oasis in the chasm had spread within adventurer circles. This came from the numerous accounts of adventurers seemingly being trapped and directionless in the dark, before suddenly finding themselves in the company of a large camp with unlimited supplies. Of course, many people deemed these as nothing more than a hallucination, something that desperate people thought up of as a way to cope with the horrible death rates of the chasm. However, as the days passed, the rumors were slowly being given credence. It became known that the supposed oasis was from the Reborn company, that its location was different each night, and that anyone was welcome to come in and out of the camp as they pleased. It was therefore inevitable that the conglomerates ended up hearing about it. "An oasis? That's absurd," said Levi to his advisors. "If they do have a mobile camp, then it can't be anything more than ours. We have our own houses instead of tents, but even then we are spending lots of resources just to keep them up. I don't think that their 15,000 men can do such a task." The scouts had nothing more to offer. They hadn't seen this camp themselves, but the detailed accounts from the adventurers put this possibility to more than likely. "We don't have to worry about them. It looks like Teresa's is now able to join the fight. It won't be long before she arrives here and changes the game with her additional ally. Levi then turned to his scouts. What did you see from the lava lake? Sir, we are able to follow their tunnels, and we are almost 100% sure that they have moved to another lava vein further down the chasm. We can follow them easily, said the scout. Levi nodded. Very well then, let us start packing up our camp and we shall start our journey once more. We must find these demi-humans before Teresa arrives here. And just as they were about to disperse, they heard a knock from outside. Sir Levi, we have a visitor. Tell them to wait, Levi answered. We have to deal with the demi-humans. But before Levi could finish his sentence, the door opened suddenly and a new figure emerged. Levi's eyebrows furrowed from the rude interruption, but when he saw the man's face, he knew that he couldn't say anything untowards him. Pelek, said Levi, nice of you to join us. Pelek, a man with olive skin and a bright white smile, approached Levi. Old friend, you weren't going to leave me out of this, were you? Levi feigned a smile. Of course not, why wouldn't I want one of the Hephaestus heirs by my side? That's right, I seem to remember us having made an agreement. I supply you with armors and weapons and resources and you share the profits of the chasm with me, Pelek said. But I heard about this weird thing about some magical creatures. It was at this point that Levi couldn't hide his wince. It looked like he wouldn't be able to hoard this information for himself. We've just discovered their presence. I was about to send you a letter, Levi said. Pelek shook his head, still displaying that white smile. I think you've hidden them for a while now.
Tusk.
But it doesn't matter, now that I'm here we can properly share the profits as we discussed. You wouldn't want your army to be fighting with dull edges now, would you? Levi bit his lips. The bad thing about owning the biggest overseas branch of the Vanderbilt Company was the fact that most of their resources were an ocean's width away, and he couldn't ask for help from his siblings. They'd use it as an opportunity against him. So, as much as he wanted to keep the profits to himself, Levi would have to play nice with the seventh heir of the Hephaestus clan. Tell me what you've been doing, friend. Levi had his advisors speed Pelek up to the current information about the chasm. After about an hour or so, Pelek nodded his head in understanding. I see you have a problem with scouting, it seems. Venturing deeper into the tunnels requires a lot of risk. I'm bleeding scouts. I can't afford to, that's why we have to take it slow even if the demi-humans are getting away. Pelek shook his head. This is one of your problems, old friend. You're too self-sufficient. You aren't using all of the resources around you to the best of your abilities. What do you mean? The adventurers, said Pelek. These people are a hungry pack of wolves. They'll jump at the chance of treasure, so give them a piece. And then they'll gladly jump into that lava lake and follow those demi-humans to the ends of the chasm. This is what Teresa would have done. In fact, she may be doing it right now. How else was she able to keep up with your army even when she entered the chasm later than yours? She uses that charisma of hers to get the adventurers to do her bidding for her. Find the demi-humans, and she'll reward them with tremendous treasures. Levi frowned at the mention of his opponent. It seemed he'd have to play by Teresa's rules if he wanted to defeat her.
All right, how?
Easy, said Pelek. I'll handle it. I've brought with me some incredible works of art that will surely interest those adventurers. Pelek led Levi outside, where there were carriages filled with shiny new armor and weapons brought straight from the Hephaestus workshop. Bu-22. Ra-ta-ta. Michael was glad to hear the orc chieftain's voice in his head. Report. We've been following these demi-humans, they haven't spotted us. Unfortunately, they don't seem to be in any hurry to return to their kingdom. We shall report their current location now. Michael received telepathic directions that ChatJK6 quickly translated into a visual map. It looks like it's time to pack up our camp and move. Chapter 1300, Cornered. The next few days of the chasm turned into a cat and mouse game. The demi-humans would move to one spot, Levi's army would chase after them, causing the demi-humans to move as well. The only reason why Levi and the Vanderbilt army wasn't absolutely annoyed by this constant back and forth was the fact that they were always first in every scenario. This allowed them to fight against demi-humans, which would cause them to sometimes abandon the magical monsters they tamed. This allowed Levi to keep their corpses for study. And it was also good for them that the Goldstone Coalition was always one day behind them. It looked like they were winning the race in the chasm, and if they did eventually find the demi-human kingdom, they'd be the first one there. Unfortunately for Levi, it seemed that there was someone following them closely behind. "I keep hearing about this oasis," said Pelek, "and it is messing with our plans." "I have no idea," replied Levi, "but it is true there are less adventurers willing to scout for us." They had offered any adventurer around them a lot of weapons and armors from the Hephaestus Company. Unfortunately, most if not all of them had declined. Yes, scouting was dangerous, but these adventurers should obviously see that the danger was worth it if they were going to be receiving top-notch armor. "I noticed that some of those adventurers already have good armor equipped," said Levi, eyeing Pelek. "You aren't betraying me, are you?" In Levi's eyes, the only reason those adventurers could afford those good-looking armor and new weapons was through the Hephaestus Company. "No, why would I do that?" Pelek said, offended, "but that doesn't mean it's not from Hephaestus. Perhaps one of my siblings is here causing a little bit of trouble for me." "That is not ideal," said Levi. "Certainly not. As far as I know, I've made preparations to assure that they can't enter the chasm, but perhaps a rat was able to pass through our defenses." "But who?" "The only ones who I know could create that kind of high-quality armor and be willing to sell them to lowly adventurers would be my elder siblings, but they're far too busy to deal with things here in the chasm." "Who would it be?" They didn't know that they were competing with an actual dwarf, someone who wasn't even taking his job in the Rebornian camp seriously.
They, they.
Eventually, the Vanderbilt army entered a tunnel into the chasm, thinking that they had followed the demi-humans, not knowing that they fell right into their traps. Monkeys, lizards, lions, and tigers, all of gigantic sizes, looked down upon the soldiers with saliva dripping down their mouths. "Shit," Levi cursed, "there must have been 30 nascent spirit-level magical monsters here in total." And the worst part was that they had separated their army into their different divisions as a way to pierce the demi-humans into a corner. But as it turned out, it was a trap that they fell into nicely. Now the Vanderbilts were in a bind. "This is good, old friend," said Pelek. "Don't you see that the demi-humans are starting to panic? They're sending out their entire forces to deal with us. This means that we're getting too close to their kingdom." Levi, once he was able to relax, eventually agreed with Pelek's words. "You're right. I bet that if we defeat these magical monsters, we'll be able to find their kingdom beyond it." They both were of the same opinion. Whoever defeated these magical monsters would be the first one to enter the demi-human kingdom.
They.
Michael received word almost immediately. The shadow orcs had infiltrated the demi-human kingdom. Unfortunately, it seemed that some kind of disturbance had prevented them from sending out any additional info aside from basic telepathy of words. It seemed that the demi-humans had someone amongst them with the equivalent strength of a nascent spirit cultivator. And just like the Vanderbilt army, they also found themselves facing an entire horde of nascent spirit magical monsters. Thankfully, Michael was able to see them beforehand, so they had the element of surprise against them. He could decide when they would show themselves. "Supreme Leader Boo Tutu, I have come to report that the Vanderbilt army is currently undergoing a fight of attrition with the magical monsters." Even from afar, he could hear the sounds of war echoing off the walls. The ground itself shook as gigantic creatures fell and kicked and fought. "Looks like it's time for my army to move."
They.
Levi sweated as he commanded his army to eventually coalesce into one unit. His nascent influence had allowed his soldiers to fight beyond their powers, allowing them to deal a decent blow against the magical monsters. His diva, a knight wearing wooden armor, shouted wordlessly to his army, and his soldiers, spurred on, acted with precise movements as if they were robots. Leading the Vanderbilt armies were none other than 5 nascent spirit cultivators, Levi's generals. Their mighty and heroic figures swept through the magical monsters with ease. Their nascent armors allowed them to defend against the creature's destructive blows. But as the fight drew on, the sheer number and pure strength of these magical creatures proved to be far too oppressive. Levi's nascent spirit generals were unharmed, but they were exhausted. They were not only fighting for themselves, but they were also protecting their army behind them. Eventually, fighting tens of those magical creatures would exhaust anyone. Levi began to consider a retreat. It was the only way. His army had lost thousands of soldiers, with more injured. They were bleeding numbers, while the magical monsters seemed to be replenished to no end. Damn it, how did those demi-humans control these magical monsters? Even a conglomerate army can't defeat them. A knock interrupted Levi's thoughts. "Sir, the Goldstones have arrived," said his scout, "and it seems that they have Teresa with them." And that brings us to the end of this chapter. This is Jason Audiobook, and I just want to give a huge thank you to every single one of you for staying all the way through. Whether you're listening to relax, to escape, or to dive deeper into these incredible worlds, your time and support truly mean everything. Every like, every comment, and every share helps this channel grow and allows more stories to come to life in audiobook form. You're not just listeners, you're part of this journey. If you have a web novel you'd love to hear turned into an audiobook, don't hesitate to send me a DM. I'm always looking for new adventures to bring to the channel, and your suggestions could be the next big story we dive into. And if you're enjoying the content and want to support even more, consider checking out the Patreon for exclusive early releases, bonus chapters, and behind-the-scenes content. Once again, thank you for being here. Until the next chapter, stay immersed, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next story.